This is Dry Falls, one of the most iconic features of the Washington Scablands, carved by large volumes of suddenly released water, supposedly all from Lake Missoula. But when we examine the Omach region, we find that there was a large water source that came down from the Okanogan Valley, from British Columbia. But we'll check that out later. It was the water rushing down the Grand Coulee Channel that pulverized the basalt rock into this scabland. But to understand how Dry Falls formed, we must start with the channel that Deep Lake is in, which is a deep scour. Water was wrapping around the east bank of the Grand Coulee, and it began to carve down this path. Once this riverbank that cuts through the main channel was carved, the first step for the formation of Dry Falls was completed, because you need a cliff to form a cataract. Now, when the Grand Coulee was full and doing its thing, it flowed over this cliff, and as it flowed over it, it eroded two channels backwards. To make the iconic double cataract formation known as Dry Falls. This thin strip of land that was saved from destruction is known as an inner cataract ridge, or an intermediary arm. If we go over to Deep Lake, we can see its bank edge, and then we see another. On top of the final bank is a massive circular scour, 300 feet across, which was carved at the apex of this catastrophe. At the base of this channel are more of these large circular scours, which are carved by turbulence, spinning water vortices. These are potholes, the same as what you can find at your local river, just way larger. Before we go over to the Omach area, we need to understand the connection between drumlins and furrows. Furrows, aka lineations, are these long parallel ruts. These are something you can also find in rivers, and they commonly cover scablands. They do a great job of showing us the current direction, because they form in line with the current. And they allow us to see that the water flow had some chaotic and unexpected current directions. In the Dry Falls area, the furrows are in line with the Grand Coulee Channel, and so are the drumlins, which are these elongated ridges of sediment. This is a great proof that flooding creates drumlins. It is very controversial to state this. This theory was scientifically proposed in 1983 by John Shaw under the concept of subglacial flooding. It was published in the Journal of Glaciology and was heavily contested by colleagues in the field, and has since been largely forgotten. But the proof of this theory can be found and seen every day, even 4 times a day, in inlets that have large tidal swings. They show the fluid motion responsible, being laminar, low turbulent flow. And when the tide drops, perfect drumlin specimens are revealed. When the tide rushes back in, the drumlins are reshaped, and it is seen how they are constantly rearranged by tidal swings. And micro drumlins can be seen being transported along in clear rivers. But you tell me if observation is more important than obeying the consensus. There are also lines of mounds right next to these drumlins and furrows. Less orderly mounds are found all over the Washington Scablands. So how do they form? Mounds are commonly found in floodplains. On riverbanks, and on beach sand. You can even see how water rushing over them in different current directions shapes them. They can be made from water dissecting ripples, or in this case, dissecting drumlins. Mounds also open up a huge can of worms and are considered to be the most abundant geologic mystery. In the Washington Hills, at elevations that make no sense, you can see how paths of water flow go between the mounds and result in their shaping. The mounds in Washington and Oregon push up the water levels way higher than expected. But I'll save that thought-provoking topic for another video. Okay, now, without any further ado, let's go to the Omak Plateau. This landscape is also scoured up into a scabland. We find the same features. There are mounds on the rounded hills. There are lines of mounds with drumlins next to them. Furrows also in the same orientation. And there are also a handful of megascale ripples. But this is apparently all from glacial erosion. And to say that it's from floodwaters redefines the Washington Scablands completely. But the erosion is literally identical to the other side of the Columbia. And around the Dry Falls area, which both are formed from floodwaters well after the glaciers receded. On both sides of the Omak Plateau are large riverbanks. Showing the water levels of huge rivers that float around the plateau. So why is it so problematic to think that the Okanogan Valley was another source of floodwaters to the Washington Basin, alongside Lake Missoula? Because the Missoula Basin has the perfect terrain to hold two large lakes with a narrow outlet that could easily be ice dammed, creating the perfect conditions for dangerous amounts of water to be contained and catastrophically released into Washington. But the Okanogan Valley has no such mechanism. It doesn't have a narrow point, and it doesn't have a large basin. And the ice sheet dam would have had to have been to the south of the valley to dam it, which is not how the Laurentide ice sheet receded. But that's not the biggest problem. It's elevation. The elevation of the Omak Plateau is over 850 meters. and if we travel back into the Okanogan Valley, its floor is only 360 meters in elevation. So this area would have had to have been somehow dammed up to a ridiculous level of water height, and then would have had to have been suddenly released to create enough floodwaters to completely cover and scour the Omak Plateau. So it might be easier to call all of this glacier erosion, but the details strongly disagree. And finding out how water was able to flow over this elevated plateau should be the concept of contemplation, not dismissal. Thank you for watching, and stay catastrophic, my friends.